The air bit my lungs, each breath a gasp stolen from this god-forsaken tomb of ice. They called it Alabaster, some prisoner's bitter joke that stuck. It might as well have been hell, frozen over. The name fit, with those pearly white plains that glitched beneath the yellow gleam of Helios. The wind didn't just howl here, it shrieked with the voices of 1,000 damned souls, carrying the burn of a frost no human body was meant to survive. I knew. I felt it sinking into my bones day after day. No one comes here by choice. That much, even a low-life scum like me figured out fast. Even the guards, the hardened lot they were, wore their time here like a badge of twisted pride and looming death. It got into your blood, that chill, into your brain. They weren't just hauling ore out of the mines here. They were harvesting despair, pound by frozen pound. I remember the sting of the transport ship, the cattle prod in my ribs as they herded us. Convicts all. Some looked worse than me. Eyes gone hollow with crimes I didn't want to imagine. A few wore the defiant sneer of men not willing to go quietly, like those idiots would be calling the shots on Alabaster. The first week in the mines was a monotonous cycle of clanging metal and numb hands. Every clang of my pickaxe, I swore, was one chip closer to my grave. It wasn't the work, back-breaking as it was, that would kill you. It was the quiet, the maddening stretch of nothingness beyond those plasteel walls. You got used to the stink of sweat, even to the emptiness in your rations-filled guts. But the quiet that crept inside, settling in your skull like a fog that never lifted. "Hey, new blood!" A voice hissed one night in the barracks, so low it could barely cut through the chorus of wheezing coughs and harsh snores. A form huddled beside my cot, a face split by a crooked grin in the dim light. "The name's Scabs. Got a few things a guy like you ought to know." I blinked crust from my eyes. Survival, I was learning quickly, meant alliances you didn't fully understand but couldn't survive without. Scabs wasn't the most imposing fella, wiry scar tissue marring his neck, but he had that caged animal look of a man who'd been here too long. He talked about contraband routes, which guards to bribe and which ones to steer clear of. More importantly, he talked about whispers, rumors of something shifting beneath the ice. Not another geological survey. Something else. Guards disappearing into the white, prisoners too, never to return. "They ain't coming back up," Scabs whispered, his eyes glinting with an odd mix of fear and excitement. "Something's changed down there. You watch yourself, new blood. Alabaster don't just break your body, it steals your soul." I should have written him off as another convict gone cracked in the cold. Should have. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The same one that coiled in my gut every time I descended into the mines. Alabaster was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had its icy eyes fixed on us. Days became a brutal rhythm. Up with the dawn, down into the mines, back to the barracks, collapse into a restless sleep. Each shift I kept my eyes on the ice. Not for any escape route, the fools who tried that never even made the perimeter, but for any change. Even a hint of the distortion Scabs had whispered about would have been a relief. A break in the chilling monotony. But the ice was just ice. A pale mirror reflecting our own descent into savagery. We were animals down there, fighting over scraps of information. A few extra credits slipped to a slack-jawed guard. Every rumor was a precious commodity. Anything to cut through the despair. One night, it wasn't Scabs who sidled up to my bunk. It was a mountain of a man named Harker. He'd been one of the defiant ones on the transport, and his scowl hadn't softened one bit. "Listen up, fresh meat," Harker grunted, the stink of cheap amasec clinging to him. "Word's out, something big's happening tomorrow. Deeper shaft, new survey." "And what?" I managed, the words scraping against my raw throat. "Makes you think some rocklickers like us are on the guest list?" "This ain't about rocks," Harker sneered. "This is about the things they've been hauling topside. And it's about getting a look before they turn whatever it is into a new damn weapon to keep us in line." The seed Scabs had planted burst to ugly life in that moment. Alabaster wasn't just squeezing us dry, it was hiding something. Something that could shift the precarious balance of power. Hope, it turns out, is a dangerous beast on a frozen wasteland. Morning came, the usual grim-faced procession into the mine shafts. But somewhere beneath the second level, the routine cracked. Instead of the familiar tunnels, we were herded toward a shaft I'd never seen before. It yawned open, an ominous black wound in the ice. "This it?" I muttered to Scabs, who was jostling beside me. He nodded, his gaze darting nervously. "Looks like they've been chiseling away down here for an age." The guards were different too, not the usual lax crew. These ones were hardened, plasma rifles slung tight, their eyes flicking over the convict mob with satisfaction. "Down you go, filth!" one barked, motioning with his rifle. "And watch your step. Wouldn't want anything untoward happening on company time now, would we?" The descent was torture. The shaft was rough-hewn, treacherous, the ice walls gleaming with a wetness that sent a primal dread through me. We hit bottom and the world, it tipped sideways. We weren't in a mine anymore. This was a cavern, vast, the ceiling lost in a swirling mist. The ice here wasn't the clean white of the surface. It was mottled, veined with something dark like polluted blood. "By the Emperor's shriveled—" Hawker's voice cracked, but it wasn't awe. It was pure, gut-churning terror. Because that's when we saw them. Not in the shadows, not in the distance. Right there, frozen into the ice walls, a nightmare gallery. Creatures. Things with too many limbs and eyes. So damn many eyes. A strangled scream rang out. Might have been mine, I couldn't tell in the chaos that erupted. Convicts scrambled backward, a wave of panic washing over years of hardened resolve. I saw Scabs stumble, his face a mask of pale horror. Harker was just gone, consumed by the crowd shoving towards the narrow way out. "Hold!" A guard's shout split the air, followed by the sharp crack of plasma fire. The blast hit the ice wall, showering us with shards. For a frozen second, the world went still. Then the ice beneath their feet. It buckled. A fissure snaked its way across the cavern floor, widening with sickening speed. I leapt for solid ground, the crash of the collapsing ice drowning out the panicked yells. 3 of the guards vanished into the yawning darkness, their screams cut abruptly short. The chaos subsided, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the gasps of the survivors. It was like something had sucked the life out of the place, leaving only stunned horror in its place. "Anyone hurt?" It was the lead guard, a scarred brute named Sergeant Rex. He hadn't fallen, weathered hands gripping the edges of the widening chasm. His voice was steady, that cold professionalism the only thing holding this scrap of reality together. No one answered. The creatures, frozen and terrible, stared back at us across the gap, and something flashed in Rex's eyes. Not fear, but a dangerous glint. "Right," he snapped. "This changes things. Surveys off. We haul back whatever intelligence we can and report this find topside." He gestured vaguely towards the frozen horrors. He didn't have to say it. We all knew what he meant. Those things weren't going to stay dead forever. The ice would eventually give up its secrets, and whatever was in those icy tombs could become the corporation's new cash cow, or their doom. Harker, I later found out, wasn't among the survivors. A piece of me, the piece that still clung to some scrap of decency, mourned the defiant bastard. Back at the surface, the light of Helios felt blinding, alien. Everything had shifted. The barracks, the mine shafts, even the frozen air. It all seemed to breathe a silent warning. We weren't convicts anymore. We were live bait, trapped on a planet about to become a whole lot less dead. Alabaster was in a state of lockdown. Even the dumbest convict knew change was whistling through the tunnels like those damned ice winds. More guards, edgy and jumpy, materialized throughout the camp. Rex's orders were clear. No more deep mining, stick to the surface layers and report anything, well, out of the ordinary. Scabs, miraculously unscathed after his tumble, latched onto me like a burr I couldn't shake. Turns out, he wasn't just a source of contraband routes. He was a fount of Alabaster's forgotten lore. Those things. He shuddered as we hunkered down on a supply crate, our meager rations warming in our numb hands. You ever hear the tales? Old-timers who've done a lifetime here? I try not to listen to the crazies, Scabs, I grunted, but there was a tremor in my own voice. No, see, that's the thing. The sane ones are the ones who tell the stories. Before Alabaster was all shiny and corporate, it was a prospector's rush. Those old bastards found stuff. They got rich or they got dead, most likely both. Weeks passed, the tension a constant stranglehold. Rex had us working double shifts, hauling ore and reinforcing the perimeter. The sharp crack of plasma fire punctuated the night, guards taking potshots at shadows or some unfortunate critter straying too close. My sleep, always fitful, dissolved into nightmares of glinting carapaces and a cavern of staring, frozen eyes. Then came the blizzard. Not your usual misery, but a true storm, whipping snow into a maelstrom that swallowed the world. The mines shut down, even Rex forced to concede against the overwhelming fury. We hunkered in the barracks, too many bodies crammed into one fetid space, the wind screaming its unending fury. "It's stirring them," Scabs muttered, his voice barely a whisper above the storm. Huddled beside me, he was a trembling mass of nerves. His bravado finally cracked. Out in the white abyss, something howled back. Not the wind, no animal. It was a sound from the belly of the planet, carried to us on the storm winds. A promise of rising, ancient things shaking off their icy slumber. When the blizzard finally died, it left behind a world altered. The snowdrifts were oddly cratered, tunnels collapsed here and there, and a new scent clung to the air. Metallic, sharp. "Blood!" Scabs choked out. "They're out there hunting!" They came at night. The camp was half asleep, that tense, exhausted sleep born of a fear you couldn't shake. A sharp scream rent the silence. It started in Barracks 5, then went dark with a choking gurgle. The whole damn place erupted in the blink of an eye. It wasn't the cold that woke me. It was the smell. That stinging, metallic scent on an even stronger current now. My gut twisted. Scabs was beside me, already grabbing for a shiv fashioned from industrial scrap. We weren't waiting for orders. No one sane would on a night like this. The barracks door splintered under a force that had no business coming from anything human. Rex was there, barking commands over the rising tide of panic. Plasma fire lashed into the darkness, the bursts searingly bright against the swirling snow. But it wasn't enough. They were too damn fast, shadows with too many glinting eyes dodging the beams. I saw one up close, razor-sharp limbs and a gaping cavity where a face should have been. For a second, I locked eyes with it. Not animal eyes, those. There was a cunning in them. Rex and his guards formed a line, a flimsy barrier against the onslaught. Men screamed, the sound swallowed by the storm and the ravenous shrieks of the attackers. Then Rex went down, not with a neat plasma blast, but in a flurry of snapping limbs. "Fall back!" I bellowed, not knowing why anyone would listen to a low-level convict like me. But in that moment, maybe it didn't matter. I grabbed Scabs by the collar, hauling him away from the slaughter. We ran, blinded by snow and terror, the barracks dissolving into a scene of carnage behind us. There wasn't anywhere to go, no escape on this rock. But there, beneath the panic, something else stirred. Fury. We ran, blinded by snow and terror, the barracks dissolving into a scene of carnage behind us. There wasn't anywhere to go, no escape on this rock. But through the swirling blizzard, I saw the old mines, the half-collapsed tunnels that riddled the landscape like forgotten scars. If we could reach them, maybe we could use the labyrinth to our advantage. "Scabs!" I yelled over the din, his terrified face barely visible in the blinding white. "The mines! We lose them in the tunnels!" It was crazy. But somewhere in that moment, under the crushing inevitability of death, crazy became the only sane option left. The wind whipped and howled around us, a vengeful beast driving us into the icy unknown. Scabs stumbled beside me, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with terror. I wasn't sure what was worse, the creatures at our heels, or the crushing fear that the mines might be a dead end. A frozen tomb instead of a refuge. We found a half-collapsed shaft, just a jagged scar in the snow. We scrambled down, the ice slippery underfoot, the cries of the things fading behind us. Or did they? "They know these tunnels," Scabs hissed, his voice trembling. "Probably better than we do." His words hit harder than any blizzard wind, but retreating wasn't an option, and neither was waiting. Even a hunted animal fights back when cornered. The tunnels twisted and branched, a frozen maze that glimmered with a strange light from the ice itself. There was something off down here. Not just the presence of those creatures, but a hum resonating through the rock. We pressed on, the only sound our own breathing and the crunch of our boots on icy gravel. The tunnel sloped downwards, deeper, and that was when the ground gave way under Scabs' feet. He yelped, disappearing into the darkness with a clatter of loose rock. "Scabs!" I yelled, scrambling to the edge. He'd landed a few meters down, a groan escaping him. "Legs busted!" he spat out, a sheen of sweat on his pale face even in the icy dimness. Cursing under my breath, I searched for a way down. Even with a busted leg, Scabs was better off alive than as bait for those things. A tangle of rusted support beams offered barely enough handholds, but desperation turned me into a damn acrobat. I clambered down, landing beside Scabs with a grunt of effort. "You good for moving?" I asked, wincing at the way his leg was bent at an awful angle. "If those things find us, I'll be good for screaming," he snarled, then grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "But before that, look!" He pointed towards a hole in the tunnel wall, half hidden by shadows. "A way out!" I hoped. "Or a way deeper in," Scabs muttered, but there was a spark in his eyes, something more than just fear. The old stories stirred within my mind. Forgotten riches and unknown terrors. A choice between the devil you know and the one you don't. But with the grating sound of those inhuman hunters growing louder behind us, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. "We move," I grunted, hauling Scabs to his feet. He bit back a scream of pain, sweat beading on his brow. Damn convicts were tougher than they looked. The opening in the tunnel swallowed the glow from within. I expected a shaft, maybe a cave-in. What I found sent an icy jolt down my spine, worse than any blizzard. It was a chamber, vast and strangely sculpted. The ice here was marbled, swirled with an inky darkness, and rising from the ice floor, dominating the space, a monstrosity. Not another of those skittering horrors, but something older, a segmented form encased in ice like a fossil from a nightmare. "The stories," Scabs whispered, his voice a thread. Old-timers whispered about a heart to this frozen hell, a source of the madness. His words hit harder than any ice wind. The corporation, with its strip mining and poking and prodding, hadn't just uncovered a few alien critters. They'd stirred something ancient. The mine shafts, the ice under our feet, it was all tainted with this corruption. But there was a path, too. A crude passage bored through the ice, leading away from the towering form. "Maybe," I muttered, the word thick on my tongue. "There's a way through this damned place after all." The howls of the hunters were closer, the sound bouncing oddly off the cavern walls. Escape, or certain death. I shouldered Scabs, a dead weight now, but still breathing. "Hold on tight, old man," I gritted. "We're taking this ice planet for one hell of a ride." The passage was treacherous, slick with a strange, oily residue. The air thickened, each breath heavy in my lungs, and the light, it seeped into me, a crawling itch under my skin. I pressed on, step by agonizing step, Scabs a chorus of curses and gasps on my back. The howls of the things faded. Whether we lost them or they found something else to feast on, I didn't dare care. Ahead, the tunnel twisted and widened. Was that a hint of pale light? I stumbled forward. The world tilted, the ice beneath my feet cracking with a sharp, deafening boom. Then a rush of frigid air, and the blinding, blessed light of Helios. Stunned and gasping, I collapsed, Scabs tumbling beside me. We'd come through. We had broken free, but freedom would always be a bitter, hard-won thing. Helios's light was merciless. After the glow of the tunnels, the harsh yellow blaze seared my eyes. I blinked back, stinging tears, a choked gasp escaping me. We weren't alone. Figures huddled in the blasted landscape, more convicts. Some were wounded, others wide-eyed with that same madness I'd seen in the depths of the mine. Had they come through other tunnels, stumbled into that same chamber? A figure detached from the group, limping towards us. It was a guard I recognized from the barracks. Burke. Mean as a frost viper and twice as tough. "You lot alive?" he asked, his narrowed gaze flicking between me and Scabs. No hint of relief, just suspicion. "As alive as anyone gets on this rock," I muttered, shifting Scabs' weight. His leg needed fixing, fast. Med supplies would be first priority. "What in the Emperor's blistered—" Burke was staring past us, back towards the barren ice field we'd crawled out of. The other survivors were doing the same, the murmur of uneasy voices rising. I turned, and the breath caught in my throat. From the hole we'd emerged, those nightmarish creatures were erupting, dozens of them. They moved with extraordinary swiftness, scrambling over the ice, propelled by a wild intensity. "They're gonna overrun!" A convict beside me choked out the words, his voice filled with terror. But Burke was already barking orders, that hardened edge in his voice cutting through the panic. "Spread out! Make 'em work for every damn inch! Form up, you useless lumps!" A grim kind of order descended. The instinct to fight, to claim some scrap of control, still burned faintly in the face of annihilation. Plasma rifles sputtered, a pitiful defense against the oncoming horde. I dug into my pocket, fingers closing around the crude shiv scabs I had cobbled together. Worthless, probably, but felt better than nothing. "What about that?" Scabs croaked, pointing a shaking finger. One of the creatures had broken from the pack. It wasn't charging towards us, it was loping towards the huddled figures of the other survivors. There, a woman crouched. One of the camp medics, I realized with a jolt. Rage surged through me, a heat to rival the icy fear squeezing my guts. "Burke!" I barked. "That one's mine!" He didn't argue, just tossed me a plasma pistol, its weight unfamiliar in my hand. "Don't waste the charge," he grunted. I didn't bother answering. I was pushing through the line, stumbling over the rocky ground. The creature had the medic pinned now, its ugly form looming over her. I aimed, forcing my hand steady, remembering the fleeting glimpse of cunning in those eyes. This wasn't some animal frenzy, it was a calculated cruelty. The plasma blast tore through the air. The creature shrieked, a piercing sound that cut short as a chunk of its form vaporized. It twisted, momentarily off balance. The medic scrambled free, terror fueling her movements. My shot half-blind luck, half-fueled fury, had shifted the odds, if only slightly. That thing recoiled, a smoking hole where its shoulder used to be. The other creatures seemed to hesitate, their inhuman shrieks laced with a hint of confusion. Burke was already capitalizing on the distraction. "Fall back!" he bellowed. "To the cliffs! Fall back!" The remnants of our convict band were retreating, stumbling over the icy rubble towards a jagged outcropping of rock. It couldn't really be called a defensible position, more like a last stand. Scabs was at my side, Burke hauling him along with surprising efficiency. "Never thought I'd miss those damned barracks," Scabs wheezed, a bloody grin splitting his face. "Least there they didn't try eating you alive." The humor was as bleak as the frozen wasteland, but it sparked defiance in me. We wouldn't go out easily. We reached the cliffside, the survivors huddling behind outcroppings of rock. Below, the creatures gathered. A few of the braver convicts took potshots, bursts of plasma fire scorching the ice. It was barely a deterrent. They were herding us, these things, driving us into a tighter and tighter corner. "Think this is it?" Scabs whispered. There was still fear in his voice, but beneath it a strange kind of resignation. I didn't answer. I was staring past the swarm below, my gaze snagged on movement further along the cliff face. A narrow fissure, perhaps an old glacial crack. Was it wide enough? "Burke!" I yelled above the din, pointing. "See that crevice? We might squeeze through." Burke squinted, following my gaze. A scowl twisted his battered features. "Risky as hell. They'd pick us off one by one." "Better than being picked off all at once," I shot back. It was a madman's plan. To Burke's credit, he didn't argue long. "Spread the word," he barked to the others. "One at a time. Make for the crack. Cover each other's backs best you can." There wasn't time for farewells. Scabs squeezed my shoulder, and then he was being hefted by two others, making their way across the exposed rock face. I watched, heart pounding, as the creatures closed in, snapping and snarling. My turn was coming. I took a deep breath, the icy wind stinging my lungs. The crack in the ice was salvation or suicide. I couldn't decide which as I squeezed through the narrow opening. Rough rock scraped against my shoulders, and the glow intensified here, a claustrophobic pressure against my skull. I emerged on the other side with a gasp, stumbling out onto a slick ledge. Below, the creatures milled in confusion, their enraged shrieks filling the air and rising up the cliff face. Burke was a few paces ahead, barking orders and shoving another convict through the gap. "Keep moving," he commanded, then leveled his plasma rifle at me. "Cover fire, new blood. Then you follow." I nodded, scrambling into a firing position. It was a desperate rearguard action. Slowing them down was the best we could hope for. Each burst of plasma bought precious seconds for the ones still making their bid for escape. My finger ached from squeezing the trigger, the acrid stench of burnt ice filling my nostrils. Two of the creatures were down, vaporized chunks of their forms smoking across the ice, but more were already clambering up the cliff face. I had to fall back. I forced my way through the fissure, the pounding in my head reaching a fever pitch. Had the others made it? Was this some twisted chute back into the clutches of the mine? A searing jolt of pain shot through my leg. I yelped, twisting to catch a glimpse of one of the creatures, clinging to the ice wall. Its glistening razor-tipped limb had slashed open my boot, drawing a line of hot blood. It lunged, and I stumbled back, my cry swallowed by the ice walls. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Then, a shadow fell across the passage ahead. "Thought you were a goner!" It was Scabs propped against the rock wall. Even wounded, he had that manic glint in his eyes. "Hold still, you idiot!" He had something in his hands, a crudely assembled explosive. I recognized parts scavenged from mine equipment, fused together with a convict's twisted brilliance. "Going out with a bang," he grinned, the effort pulling painfully at his gashed leg. My heart slammed in my ribs. It was our last, damn fool play. "You first, old man," I said, shoving him towards the exit. "Like hell! Get the others clear!" he barked back, already jamming the bomb into a crack in the ice. The timer he'd rigged, a length of fuse and a sputtering coil, was pitifully short. He gave me a final shove, and I stumbled out onto the ledge just as the blast split the air. A chunk of the cliff sheared off, rock and ice cascading down on the swarming creatures below. Their shrieks were cut short, replaced by the rumble of the collapse. I didn't wait to see the full effect, instead turning and scrambling along the ledge. Burke and a handful of others were hunkered down ahead. "That bought us some time," Burke muttered. "But not enough. They'll find another way up." The ledge gave way to a twisting ascent, a treacherous path scarred into the ice. Ahead, the cliffs reared up, a barrier of frozen fury against the pale sky. It was the edge of the known, the only escape route from the swarming chaos below. No one spoke. We climbed in a grim rhythm. Scabs leaned heavily on me, his face a mask of strained endurance. Here, there was no room for bluster. Pain and exhaustion were brutally honest equalizers. Burke, ever vigilant, scanned the ice below. "See there?" he asked, pointing towards a cluster of shifting shadows on the ice. "The bastards found their way around the collapse." The creatures moved with bizarre fluidity. I felt a cold fury that burned away any lingering doubt. We reached a wind-whipped plateau, a jagged sheet of ice precariously jutting out from the cliff face. There was nowhere else to go. Helios dipped towards the horizon, casting long, blood-streaked shadows across the bleak expanse. This, it seemed, was our final stand. "Get some rest," Burke ordered, his voice rough. "Conserve ammo. They'll be here soon." Rest. The notion was laughable. I huddled with Scabs against an icy ridge, his muttered curses a morbid lullaby. It was a waiting game now, a vigil against an inevitable end. The creatures crested the cliffs below, their chittering reaching us like a perverse mockery of human speech. "Well," Scabs managed a hoarse laugh, "guess Alabaster always delivers. Just not in a way you'd ever want." The first wave surged forward. Burke's plasma rifle blazed, cutting down one, then another. But it was a tide crashing against a crumbling levee. They skirted the edges of the plateau, hunting for weaknesses. I squeezed the trigger of my own weapon, picking targets in the seething mass below. Shots went wide, hands shaking with dread and exhilaration. We would die here. That much was certain. But we would die fighting. A searing pain ripped through my side. I stumbled back, a cry torn from my raw throat. One of the creatures had scaled the cliff face unseen, its body slick and unnaturally fast. Suddenly Burke was there, his plasma rifle discarded in favor of a mining pick. Metal cracked against the creature, and it shrieked with a fury beyond animal comprehension. But there were too many. A wave that wouldn't stop. I lunged forward, the world a haze of pain and rage. We were trapped and outnumbered. Alabaster had thrown everything at us, stripped us down to raw survival instincts, and now, facing its horrors, there was a twisted sort of peace to be found. We were beaten, but unbroken. Condemned convicts, maybe. But damn it, we were human. The world dissolved in a surge of crimson, pain searing and blinding seared through my body. The creature's barbed limb punctured flesh, a shockwave that ripped away the numbness of the battlefield. And then, darkness. But the darkness was humming with a mechanical rhythm. I gagged, my cries swallowed by the suffocating pressure around my face. Something was clamped tight, forcing my mouth open, my lungs to work in a sickening artificial cadence. Vitals spiking. Neurotoxin countermeasures initiated. A clinical voice murmured, devoid of human warmth. My eyes snapped open, not ice cliffs, not the light of Helios, but the dim interior of a medpod. Every muscle burned with unfamiliar weakness. "What the—" I choked out the word, my disorientation a twisting knot in my gut. "Subject stable. Simulation disconnect complete." The voice again, this time closer. I forced my leaden body to turn, my vision blurring. A figure in a pristine white coat stood beside the pod, a datapad in his hand. He was old, severe features lined with the chill indifference of a man more accustomed to machines than men. "Successful termination," he announced flatly. "But subject behavior profile. Interesting." My brain throbbed, struggling to reconcile the nightmare. "What is this?" was all I could manage. The doctor, if that's what he was, ignored me. "Elevated aggression markers, unusual tenacity under duress, possible leader type in future scenarios. Note for further observation." He turned, and the hum intensified, a buzzing in my skull as I drifted back towards oblivion. But the image of Alabaster, its frozen horrors, burned in my memory. I woke again, truly this time, on a hard cot in a cramped transport ship cell. The other convicts stirred, their eyes hollow and haunted. "Where's Scabs?" I asked, my voice rough. I searched the faces in the dimness, but no wiry frame, no glint of defiant humor met my gaze. A scarred, hulking convict shrugged. "Didn't make it. A lot of folks don't." The brutal truth hit me like a cold blast. Alabaster wasn't a prison sentence, it was a testing ground. The planet itself, the creatures, the struggle for survival, all a horrific stage set designed to push us to the limit, to see how far we could be driven before we snapped. I stared out the small viewport at the starfield blurring past. They used us, our minds, like lab rats in some twisted psychological experiment. But somewhere in that simulation, I had fought back, resisted, and they had noticed. I was still just a convict, a number in their system, but they'd awakened something in me, something they'd never fully control. My battle had only just begun,